This is our presentation on George Orwell's book, The Animal Farm, by Peyton, Olivia, Hunter, and me, Adrian. So, Animal Farm is a satirical critique of political corruption during the Russian Revolution. Satire is an attack by means of a manifest fiction on discernible historical particulars. So, for this, the attack was on political corruption, and the manifest fiction was on the farm/farm animals in the book, and the historical particulars were on the 1917 Russian Revolution. And this is just a picture of, a pig in charge, which is what it probably looked like in the book. So the Russian Revolution. So during the Russian Revolution, the Russians overthrew the imperial government, and the Bolsheviks were put into charge. Probably didn't say that right. The first in charge of the imperial government was Tsar Nicholas II, and then they put Vladimir Lenin in charge of the new government. So what happened was after World War I, people were not happy with the political corruption that was happening throughout the government. So that's why they overthrew the government. So the Russian Revolution goes hand in hand with Animal Farm because the characters kind of act the same way that they did in the Russian Revolution. So I made a little table here to try and put them together and show them. So the revolution on the farm and Animal Farm is just like the Russian Revolution that happened in Russia. It's basically like people were trying to create different societies that, they thought they would lead to their lives being better. And that's what happened was they overthrew the old government to bring in the new one. The Farmer Jones from Animal Farm is just like Tsar Nicholas II. They were the first rulers of the new government. So Farmer Jones, or they were not the new government, they were the rulers of the original government. Farmer Jones was in charge of the farm before the animals, and Nicholas was in charge of Russia before the new people took over. In Animal Farm, Old Major the pig is just like Vladimir Lenin in the Russian Revolution. So they were the original thinkers. They came up with the idea of the revolution and try to convince everybody that this was going to be a good idea and it was going to be good for our lives. In Animal Farm, you had Napoleon the pig, and then in the Russian Revolution, you had Joseph Stalin. So these were people that were in charge right after the revolution. Napoleon was in charge of the farm, and Stalin was in charge of Russia. And then for the Animal Farm, you had Squealer the pig, and for the Russian Revolution, you had the media. So this is just like this is propaganda. This is what happened was they were trying to convince the people by the way that they said things, or the way that they, drew pictures. Like the media is like newspapers. Squealer would have been like on the side of the barn. They just tried to convince people of what they wanted them to believe in. And in Animal Farm, you had Mr. Frederick, who was in charge of another farm, and then Adolf Hitler, who was in charge of Germany. And so these were the enemies of the new government, or the new people that were in charge. These were the enemies. So Mr. Frederick was on another farm when he treated his animals kind of badly, and Adolf Hitler was in charge of Germany, who was an enemy to Russia.
Okay, so political corruption in Animal Farm. So Animal Farm demonstrates how political power corrupts those that originally had good intentions. Ultimately, the farm reverts back to the abusive conditions that Jones put them through, and nothing ended up really changing. And I like this graphic on the side that has the pigs rolling out what looks like a carpet, and in the front of the carpet, it's called animalism, but it looks like the same exact carpet towards the end is corruption, and eventually the corruption part of the carpet's going to roll over and overtake the animalism part. So this just kind of shows that the animalism ideology is actually masked or corruption is masked by the animalism ideology, and they are one and the same. But ultimately, the whole system is corrupt. And these systems designed to originally abolish oppression and inequality actually end up becoming tools that perpetuate injustice. And leaders end up becoming corrupt tyrants when they get a little bit of a taste of power. So, the oppression and inequality never ends up leaving, and it ends up staying the same or worse, because when the original revolutionary leaders get a little bit of a taste of power, it becomes an insatiable lust for them, and they end up just becoming corrupt and abusing the power that they have. And our first close reading, I will read through it. "My sight is failing," she said finally. "Even when I was young, I could not have read what was written there. But it appears to me that the wall looks different. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin?" For once, Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now except one single commandment. It ran, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. After that, it did not seem strange when next day the pigs were supervising the work on the farm, all carried whips in their trotters. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had bought themselves a wireless set, were arranging to install a telephone, and had taken out subscriptions to John Bull, Titbits, and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange when Napoleon was seen strolling in the farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. No, not even when the pigs took Mr. Jones's clothes out of the wardrobes and put them on, Napoleon himself appearing in a black coat, rat catcher, breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite sew appeared on the watered silk dress, which Mrs. Jones had been used to wear on Sundays. So, this is a really significant passage of Animal Farm, and it's a powerful example of satire. Throughout the book, the commandments became more and more contradictory as the pigs gradually changed them to fit their beliefs as their beliefs changed and strayed further and further away from the original ideals of the rebellion. And this signifies the point in the novel where the commandments have essentially completely disappeared and have diminished into just one statement, which is the ultimate contradiction of the entire rebellion and everything that the animals originally stood for. The phrase, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, is a complete and blatant contradiction. And it serves as a satire of the corruption of power and the manipulation of language to justify abuse and abuse of power. The pigs who were once oppressed by humans have now become the oppressors themselves and become exactly what they were trying to get away from and trying to get rid of. And as we see at the end of this passage, the pigs are starting to become interchangeable with humans, and they are taking the actions and becoming humans essentially, and wearing the clothes that humans wear, and using a pipe and acting like humans. So the farm animals are no longer distinguishing the pigs from humans. And I think there's also a satirical element to the fact that Benjamin is now the one who is reading this final commandment. And he for once chose to use his reading ability and break his rule to say this commandment out loud. He's a character who throughout the book didn't really give in to the rebellion, and and he would never read the commandments to the animals when they asked, but this is the first time that he actually did it. And the use of Benjamin to read this statement is signifying the gravity of the situation and how at this point the corruption is inevitable and there's no escaping it. And this is an attack on the fact that even people who are skeptical in situations like this don't really have the strength to fight back, and they end up giving in to the corruption and the political corruption and its inevitability. So eventually they give in and accept how things are. So overall, the use of this passage by Orwell satirizes the hypocrisy of the corruption that accompanies political power, and specifically in political revolutions, and in this case, the Russian Revolution.
Okay, our second close reading is a quote from page 22. It says, "By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had heard him utter before." So throughout the book, Napoleon is very strong-willed and wants to enforce his ideas, but eventually takes over control by using violence. In this quote, we see that he's making the sound that triggers his guard dogs that he trained to attack Snowball. Snowball is winning the vote about whether they should build this windmill on Animal Farm, and Napoleon releases his dogs to take the power away from Snowball. Orwell writes this to satirize the power struggle between Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin during the Russian Revolution. Joseph Stalin took over control and appointed his own people, just like how Napoleon has his guard dogs and takes control from Snowball. The third close reading is from page 44. It says, "He announced that by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, the beasts of England had been abolished. From now onwards, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. 'Why,' cried Muriel, It's no longer needed, comrade, said Squealer stiffly. Beasts of England was the song of the rebellion, but the rebellion is now completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In Beasts of England, we expressed our longing for a better society in days to come, but that society has now been established. Clearly, this song has no longer any purpose. Originally, the song Beasts of England was sung to represent unity on the farm after all the animals drove away the farmers, but as the book progresses, Napoleon bans this song. This is likely because the song represents when they finally achieved freedom and equality in the beginning, and Napoleon probably feels threatened by this time because at that time he had no power. There was just an equal there was no hierarchy. So when Napoleon bans the song, the pigs have to submit to what he wants, and Orwell is satirizing the way Joseph Stalin ran his government, showing that he was corrupt and he suppressed communist ideas and essentially did whatever he wanted, which is what Napoleon does for the pigs.
For the fourth close reading, I have a quote from page 56, and its 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. Orwell, the author, uses satire in this passage to criticize the political system and human nature. The animals wanted freedom and to get away from the oppression and bad lifestyle that they were given from Mr. Jones. However, the animals, more so the pigs, ended up turning into the very thing they sought to destroy, which was what the quote above is describing. The pigs went so far in the wrong direction that they were indistinguishable between themselves and humans. And for the conclusion, through the close readings, it is evident how Orwell used satire to explain that what had happened in the Russian Revolution was what was happening in Animal Farm, and that the satire not only questions the political systems, but also human nature in itself. The farmland that once had ideas for freedom and equality ended up turning into pigs walking upright with whips that were wearing human clothing. The book also exposes how history tends to repeat itself, as once the pigs got a taste of the power, it became too much and eventually drove Napoleon to be equated to Joseph Stalin, and the system they wished to abolish caused the new society to be arguably worse than the one Mr. Jones gave them. For the discussion questions, we had 3. How are the dogs used as a symbol of fear or control? How did Orwell use animalism to satirize political systems like that in the Russian Revolution? And do the pigs represent a legitimate attempt at creating a better society, or how power can corrupt even the smartest in the land?